Most people believe the money in their bank account is a store of value. History proves it is often a trap. The illusion of safety is always the first casualty of a financial collapse. From the debasement of the Roman currency to the hyperinflation of the Weimar Republic, the pattern is identical, and it is repeating right now. On a Sunday evening in August 1971, the United States government committed the greatest default in modern history. By severing the dollar from gold, Richard Nixon did not just change a policy, he stole the wealth of a generation, turning the world's reserve currency into a floating political promise. That promise has now expired. Look at the reality around you. We are drowning in $34 trillion of debt, adding another trillion every 100 days. This is no longer economics. This is the mathematics of a Ponzi scheme entering its collapse phase. The interest payments on this debt have now eclipsed the entire national defense budget, creating a death spiral that no tax policy can solve. The inflation you see is not a temporary supply chain issue. It is the sound of the currency dying. But while the mainstream media distracts you with political theater and culture wars, a silent countermove is being executed in the shadows. This is the true significance of the Trump economic agenda that no one is discussing openly. It is not merely about tariffs or taxes. It is a covert preparation for a new monetary standard. By floating the idea of a strategic Bitcoin reserve and aggressively securing critical resources, a faction within the power structure is preparing a lifeboat for the dollar. They know the crisis of confidence that destroyed the 1,970 seconds is returning, but this time there is no safety net. The crash of 2026 is already baked into the numbers. The only variable left is who controls the landing. What you are about to hear is the roadmap of that transition. It explains why central banks are hoarding gold at record rates while telling you to buy paper assets. The game has changed. And if you do not understand the new rules, you are already the losing player. To understand the architecture of the coming collapse, you must first look at the illusion that preceded the last one. Before the chaos of 1971, the world operated under a spell called the Bretton Woods system. In this era, the American dollar was not merely a piece of paper. It was a property title. Every $35 in circulation was a legally binding claim on 1 ounce of physical gold sitting in a fortified vault. This was the contract that convinced the world to store their wealth in America. They trusted the dollar because they believed the gold was actually there. It was a system built on the premise of discipline, where the government could not spend what it did not possess. But behind closed doors, the political elite had already decided to violate that contract. They wanted to fight a massive war in Vietnam and build an expensive Great Society welfare state at home simultaneously. The problem was they did not have the tax revenue to pay for it, so they chose the path of fraud. They quietly printed millions of paper claims for gold that did not exist. It was the ultimate information asymmetry. While the average citizen saved dollars believing they were preserving their labor, the government was actively diluting those savings to fund their political ambitions. It was a perfect crime until the rest of the world started doing the math. Foreign nations led by France realized the United States was running a fractional reserve scheme on a global scale. They began demanding their physical gold back before the vaults ran dry. This was not just a diplomatic dispute. It was a bank run on the United States of America. The gold reserves in Fort Knox began to drain at a catastrophic rate. The government faced a binary choice. They could either cut spending and admit they were broke, or they could change the rules of the game to trap everyone inside the system. They chose the trap, and that decision set the stage for the single most devastating betrayal in financial history. The heist was executed on a Sunday evening when the markets were closed and the public was distracted. On the 15th of August 1971, President Richard Nixon interrupted popular television broadcasts to announce a new economic policy. He looked directly into the camera and told the American people that he was temporarily suspending the convertibility of the dollar into gold. That word temporarily was the most expensive lie in modern history. It was not a pause. It was a permanent default. In that singular moment, the US dollar ceased to be money and became currency. It was no longer a store of value, but a tool of political control. This was the birth of the fiat era, a system where value is dictated not by scarcity but by decree. The psychological shock was absolute because the average citizen did not realize they had been robbed until long after the crime was committed. This is the ultimate form of information asymmetry. While the working class went to sleep believing their savings were safe, the government had fundamentally rewritten the laws of physics for the global economy. They unchained the dollar from reality, allowing them to print prosperity out of thin air. But when you sever the link between money and truth, you do not get freedom. You get consequences. The anchor was gone, and the American economy was about to drift into a storm of punishment that would destroy the financial soul of the nation. The market reaction was not immediate, but it was inevitable. Without gold to restrict the supply of money, the politicians unleashed a flood of new dollars into the system, creating a false boom that would soon turn into a nightmare. The consequences arrived not as a whisper, but as a scream. We call it stagflation, but that is a polite academic term for economic suffocation. For the first time in history, Americans faced a terrifying paradox where the economy stopped growing, yet prices kept exploding upwards. It was a fever that would not break. Between 1965 and 1981, the US dollar did not just fluctuate, it collapsed. It lost 66% of its purchasing power. Think about the violence of that number. It means that for every hour you worked, the system was quietly stealing 40 minutes of your life through the invisible tax of inflation. This is when the great illusion finally shattered. Investors watched in horror as the cost of oil, food, and housing skyrocketed, but they were looking at the wrong metric. Gold and commodities were not becoming more valuable. The dollar was simply dying. The ruler used to measure wealth was shrinking in real time. This specific historical trauma is exactly why the smartest capital in the world today is fleeing into Bitcoin and gold. They are not speculating on price appreciation. They are hedging against currency debasement. They know that when faith in paper money evaporates, the only safety is in assets that cannot be printed by a bureaucrat. But the government refused to accept this verdict. Instead of fixing the broken money, they decided to attack the market itself, attempting to outlaw the very signals that were warning of the collapse. In a moment of pure panic, Richard Nixon signed Executive Order 11615. With the stroke of a pen, he made it illegal for businesses to raise prices and for workers to demand higher wages. It was the economic equivalent of trying to stop a fever by breaking the thermometer. They actually believed that if they threatened people with jail time, they could force the market to behave. But reality does not take orders from the White House. Instead of stopping inflation, the freeze created shortages. Grocery store shelves went empty. Farmers drowned their chickens rather than sell them at a loss. It was a masterclass in how to destroy a nation from the inside out. The lesson was brutal but clear. You cannot mandate confidence. Every time a government tries to fix a currency crisis with more control, they only accelerate the collapse. They proved that when the system is rigged, administrative interventions do not save the dollar. They only validate the public distrust. The artificial suppression of prices only built up more pressure behind the dam, ensuring that when it finally broke, the flood would be even more devastating. But if you think that level of incompetence was confined to the past, you are not looking at the debt clock ticking on your screen right now. We are watching the same script play out, but on a stage that is exponentially larger and more dangerous. We are no longer watching a replay of the past. We are living through its escalation. If you thought the 1970s were unstable, look at the ledger today. The United States is now carrying a debt load heavier than at the peak of World War II, but this time there is no war to win and no industrial boom to pay it off. We are simply borrowing from the unborn to pay for the mistakes of the living. This creates a terrifying fragility. In 1971, there was at least a memory of gold. Today, the global reserve currency is backed by nothing but a phrase, full faith in credit. But faith is a fragile collateral. It works until the exact moment it doesn't. When the world looks at $34 trillion in unpayable obligations, that faith begins to curdle into panic. You can feel the tension in the markets. It is the vibration of a rubber band stretched to its breaking point. Financial models are converging on 2026 as the mathematical point of no return. This is the year where the interest on the debt consumes the capacity to function, triggering a liquidity crisis that will make the Great Recession look like a minor correction. You are not crazy for sensing a crash. You are simply reading the balance sheet that the media refuses to show you. The system is sprinting toward a cliff, and the elites know it. That is why the strategy has suddenly shifted from denial to a desperate covert reorganization. They are no longer trying to pay off the debt. They are preparing to inflate it away or reprice it against a new standard. This brings us to the quiet revolution happening behind closed doors. For decades, the Federal Reserve has operated as an untouchable fourth branch of government, but the return of Donald Trump signals a hostile takeover of this old guard. He views the central bank not as an ally, but as a liability that has printed the empire into a corner. The secret plan is not a return to the past, it is a violent pivot to the future. You are hearing whispers of a strategic Bitcoin reserve and a renewed focus on domestic energy dominance. Do not mistake this for mere campaign enthusiasm. It is a calculated geopolitical weapon. The strategy is to move the United States from a debt-based standard to a mixed asset standard. By holding hard assets like gold and digital scarcity like Bitcoin, the administration aims to force confidence back into the dollar by backing it with something the market actually values. It is the Nixon shock in reverse. While Nixon severed the link to reality to save the system, this new paradigm seeks to reforge that link to prevent a total collapse. It is a paradox of power. To save American financial dominance, they must break the traditional rules of American finance. They are preparing to bypass the Federal Reserve's monopoly on value, creating a lifeboat for the nation's wealth that floats on tangible assets rather than political promises. The elite have realized that, in a world of infinite paper, the only way to win is to hold the finite truth. But knowing the plan is only half the battle. The real question is whether you are positioned to survive the transition. Do not expect a soft landing. The era of comfortable illusions is ending. What we witnessed in the 1970s was not an anomaly, it was a dress rehearsal for the crisis we face today. But this time, the stakes are existential. In 1971, the elites moved the world from gold to faith, trusting in the promises of men to manage the value of money. That experiment has finally reached its mathematical limit. The next transition will not be from gold to paper, but from faith back to math. The market is already silently rejecting the empty promises of fiat currency in favor of hard assets that cannot be debased by a printing press. We are watching a financial system that has outlived its own logic, grinding its gears against the reality of $34 trillion in unpayable debt. The pivot is inevitable. The only variable remaining is your personal preparation. Do not wait for a savior to restore the past. Prepare for the assets that will rule the future. As the saying goes, history does not repeat, but it certainly rhymes. The global financial order is shifting under your feet right now. The question is not if the system changes. The question is simply whether you will be standing on the right side of the shift when the dust finally settles.